Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. Defeated Spurs last weekend left Manchester United in 15th place in the table. Next up, they take on a resurgent Everton managed by the first person challenged with bringing back the good times to Old Trafford. So from David Moyes to Ruben Amorim, United seem to be stuck in a cycle of underperformance. So what is preventing them from moving forward? Joining us today, we have the Athletic's Adam Crafton, Anka and Oli Kay as well. Adam, let's start with you. Look, there were 7 academy players on the bench at the weekend to the defeat against Spurs. Was that unfortunate because of injuries or maybe a sign of things a little deeper?
Well, if you're using academy players, that's a good news story. But as ever with Manchester United, a good news story is spun by the media into something very negative. I think the situation with the academy players on the bench over the weekend was just quite unlucky, right? They had a week of training where everything that could go wrong did go wrong, injuries-wise. We can talk about squad composition. Clearly, it's a squad that, I know we've been using this term for many, many years now, but it's a squad that is in a transition phase. You know, you've just moved out Rashford and Antony. So, yeah, there's an argument United should have brought a forward in. That would have definitely helped on Sunday. And helps in general. But equally, you can't really account for a week where you just lose all your midfield options.
Yeah, Ollie, we also need to talk about the manager slightly. Ruben Amorim has endured the worst start to any manager post-Ferguson in the Premier League. The defeat at Tottenham was United's 8th in 14 Premier League games under Amorim, with only 4 wins to his name. I mean, why is his job so far so hard as he says it?
I think because there's a total disconnect between his vision and the squad he's inherited, and the fact that the club went from buying players for one manager who they'd eventually decided to stick with at the end of last season after a really poor season in the Premier League. They stuck with it. Erik ten Hag, they bought players for Erik ten Hag's system, only to sack him, I think rightly, probably too late if anything, a couple of months into the season, and then appoint a manager with a totally different playing style and totally different technical requirements for his way of playing, and they don't seem to have the players to play his system. I think that is a real problem, and I think it's you would say, well, wait until Amorim has got the players to play his way, but I don't know, it's a lot of the noises we're hearing about United's finances and so on suggests that he is going to have to make to amend to a certain extent. I'm sure there will be money spent in the summer, but at the moment it looks like it's taking an awfully long time for him to get his ideas across, and he must be just, well, A, counting down the days to the end of the season, but B, probably wishing he'd stayed at Sporting, which, if you remember, was his instinct when United came calling in October. He wanted to stay there to the rest of the season. United said, no, come now. And as low as people's expectations were, as much as anyone thought it wasn't a quick fix, I think it's been worse than anybody probably imagined.
Well, Ollie, can I just come in on that? Where we're saying, this squad can't play Amorim's system, right? That's the evidence that we're seeing at the moment. There's a few things that you'd kind of raise with that. The first one is, during the end of Ten Hag's period, you had quite a lot of people looking at United's squad saying they've got 6 or 7 first-team central defenders. Why don't they try 3 at the back? Now, clearly, there's different ways of playing 3 at the back, 5 at the back, different systems within that. So, okay, even if you take the view these players can't adapt to this or are going to take a very long time to adapt to it, the club knew then their financial situation. They also knew then there was a major risk of being outside the Champions League for a second year in a row. So there was never likely to be an outcome whereby the end of this summer, for example, you have a squad that is perfect for Amorim. So is it unreasonable to also have expected him to have been able to take this group of players a little bit further, maybe open this up to Cole as well, given you're there every week?
Regretfully.
Regretfully. But is it unfair to have expected him to actually have made more progress, over 20 games so far, given what's available to him?
That is a totally fair assessment. We said this about Erik ten Hag. We're saying this about Ruben Amorim, in that sometimes the Manchester United manager gets dealt a suboptimal poker hand. But when you're playing these sorts of games, you have to be able to use them wisely. With Erik ten Hag, it became very evident partway through last season that he essentially forfeited central areas of midfield and went the majority of my centre-backs are best defending in and around my own box, and my attackers are best at counter-attacking. So we're going to play ping-pong counter-attacking football. Fair enough. And you're going, surely there's a better way to control things. But hey, you won an FA Cup. So it worked to an extent. With Amorim, there are 2 or 3 personnel changes that seem a little bit more obvious to those in and around the Premier League and working at other Premier League clubs. So yes, Manchester United have a lot of defenders, but a lot of those defenders are quite similar. So if you look at, take a centre-back like, say, Harry Maguire, he's not too dissimilar to Matthijs de Ligt. You can say which one is better or whatnot, but these are centre-backs who aren't the quickest, want to do the majority of their defending while facing the opposition goal, and they're not the best when defending large areas of space. What they need is more defenders that are a little bit like Raphael Varane, who have recovery pace, have the ability to turn around and retreat. Unfortunately, they only have one of those players, really, and that's the 18-year-old Lenny Yoro, and he's been injured for the majority of the season. He's still coming back. So how do you balance things in your back three? One of the solutions is you perhaps play one of your fullbacks there, be it Mazraoui, and we're seeing that since Lisandro Martinez has been injured, Mazraoui's now come into the back three, and all of a sudden the build-up play is slightly quicker because Mazraoui's better at releasing the ball compared to, say, De Ligt or Maguire. There's also a big thing, if you're watching Man United all the time, you're like, this back three is so slow, this back five is so slow, how do you get things quicker? And you talk about this gap. Amorim refers to wing backs as wingers, and yet he's constantly playing fullbacks there. Diogo Dalot has many talents. He's not a final third player. He cannot cross the ball consistently. He's also right-footed and he's playing on the left-hand side. So he's always constantly coming inside. Mazraoui, for all of his qualities, not a final third player, was kind of that player at Ajax, was not very much that player at Bayern Munich. So you do need to play more attacking players in your wing-back positions, to which the question was, why are we not playing Ahmad more at right wing-back? Now, Amorim's answer to that is, well, essentially, Ahmad might be better close to goal. Ahmad wants to go inside and outside. So there are 2 or 3 things in terms of personnel that Amorim could have done, or is now beginning to do, to make things easier. But I'm going to be very, very blunt about this. Yes, the current Manchester United squad composition, the class of 24-25, the vintage how it is not suited to play Amorim's style of football. It's also not suited to play Erik ten Hag's style of football. It's not suited to play any style of football, quite frankly, because it is one of the worst assembled squads you will ever see in world football. In terms of money spent to quality there, this is like getting filet mignon, burning it to a well-done consistency, then getting some very good potatoes, mashing it to just a pulp with not even good butter, like cheap butter, then getting a bunch of custard, pouring it all over the meal and covering it with caviar.
Did you have a really bad Valentine's, Cole?
I had a lovely Valentine's Day, Adam. Thank you.
God, that brings me to the point, actually. It's really interesting you mentioned that, because, look, recruitment's really fascinating. And even if we look as far as, David Moyes and what he's done since he's left Manchester United, I don't want to say the name Anthony because, obviously, I don't know, man. The sample size is way too small at Betis. But optics-wise, it looks like he's enjoying himself elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Looks like David Moyes enjoyed himself elsewhere, winning, a wonderful European title with West Ham. I'm just thinking about how Manchester United really prepare people to come to Manchester United. Because look, any major club in the world, Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, they bring people in. Of course, not everyone succeeds, but there's an environment there where people can flourish and people do get better. What's different at Manchester United?
They don't have that. Bluntly, they don't. We know how good Bayern Munich look after football players. When Callum Hudson-Odoi was being tipped to join Bayern Munich, we at The Athletic reported a very, very comprehensive plan Bayern Munich gave to Hudson-Odoi, and it was also part of their reaction to, we completely got Renato Sanchez's signing to Bayern Munich wrong. And they told Callum Hudson-Odoi, they're going to come in. We're going to make sure you have German lessons. We're going to make sure that even if you're not in the first team lineup, you're going to have access to the first team dressing room after home games. So you can constantly be in that environment regardless of your minutes. They were going to very much place him in and around an area in Munich or Bavaria where he'd be comfortable and be close to his friends. He'd also have links to whatever sort of family support he needed. This is what a modern football club does. And that's for a football player who didn't arrive. And we know Bayern Munich does this again and again and again and again and again. We know Manchester City have former Google employees in terms of relocation. And at Manchester United, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm saying we don't hear that to the extent that we should for a football club of this size. There are fantastic articles about how Real Madrid goes out and recruits Brazilian football players and makes sure Brazilian football players are well looked after. There is a great piece on a website that isn't The Athletic, so I can't name it, and it talks about Brazilian football players in the Premier League and how in 2019 there are 2 big Premier League group chats for Brazilian football players. And if you signed for a club in the north, Roberto Firmino would put you in the group chat and he'd do the big text for if you want your meat, and you can go around to his house and get all the meat for the barbecue. And if you live in the south, David Luiz will take care of that. And this is probably why Willian is constantly living in the same 4-3 areas in London, because he's probably the kingpin of Brazil football players in the south. And again, we just don't hear that with Manchester United. A lot of the time when you do get the rare moments where you get to interview a Man United football player, you go, who are your friends in the dressing room? And it's all kind of, I kind of hang out with this person. I kind of hang out with this person. You don't really hear that we all go to the cinema and do whatever. You don't see that photograph of Arsenal players. I mean, Mikel Arteta's Arsenal. Very often you see the young players, they all go out together and their girlfriends all going out together. And you don't see that going on at Manchester United. There is a institutional apparatus that exists at some of the biggest football clubs in the world, and also some of the middleweight football clubs in the world, that it doesn't feel like it's been there at Manchester United for quite some time.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Adam, you've tweeted about one thing, actually, the difficulty of accepting the possibility of writing off this season. And I wonder what that's doing to fans. I know writing off the season's, I guess, a plausible concept, but being 15th, I'm not sure is a plausible concept for a lot of Manchester United fans. I'm looking at, Manchester United's victory since the conception of the Premier League and Alex Ferguson was in charge. That was 13 Premier Leagues in a row. I think Manchester United in those years of Ferguson in the Premier League maybe only came second, maybe 4 or 5 times. I mean, is this a fan base that's used to being in this position? And can you understand their frustrations as well?
I can understand their frustrations, but I just think it's pointless talking about. I mean, I never really want to hear about the treble again. Right? We've had our fill of nostalgia, right, coming out of that club and the stories of what it used to be like. Let's deal with the reality of what it is rather than what it was. And even the the kind of we're going to achieve this by 2028 kind of stuff, right? Okay, it's good to have expectations, good to have ambition, but this mission that they have to win the Premier League title by 2028. Okay, but right, let's just deal with where you are. Where you are is over the last 38 Premier League games, if you take the sample size over the last 38 Premier League games Man United have played, they have 45 points, right? Their level is exactly where they are, right? Just above relegation. That's the kind of points you see 16th, 15th, 14th, 13th. So it's an entirely accurate reflection. They're not underperforming, points to performances. Even the games they've won actually under Ruben Amorim against Southampton, they probably should have lost. Fulham away probably should have been a draw. The games that they've impressed in are games where they've not really played, I don't think, how he imagines Man United that he wants them to play. It's been a very kind of sit in and counter attack, the way that they've taken points off big teams over the past few years under different managers. But the point I was making was, when Ruben Amorim came in, there's 2 ways of looking at it. The first way of looking at it is actually after that little mini bounce they had under Ruud van Nistelrooy, when Amorim actually came, they were 4 points off the Champions League places, right? So the idea that this was going to be an impossible job, it didn't feel like that. When they were going to Ipswich that day, you were looking at a run of fixtures thinking, well, Man United could, now Ten Hag's gone, they could shake up a little bit. Now, the flip side of that is he is so devoted to his system, his way of playing, that there is this kind of far away promised land, nirvana, where Manchester United say we don't just want to get better this season and go from 15th to 9th or 8th. What we want to do is have a team that can win a Premier League title, right? Fair enough. So under that view, you go all in, right, on this system, and that means sucking up a hell of a lot of pain this season. And basically, accepting that whatever happens, happens. Look, they're not going to get relegated because Ipswich and Leicester can't win a football match, right? So let's just
You're saying that before United play.
But this
Ipswich.
is the thing, right?
Brave man.
Don't do that.
I promise you, Man United will not get relegated. Okay. So the worst thing that's going to happen is that they'll finish 15th, 16th. Okay, right. It's embarrassing. Mm-hmm. It's very damaging from a points per place finish, because each place that you finish in the Premier League, you get more money. So, when they're talking about, I don't know, 10 to 20 million pounds worth of cuts in the latest round of redundancies, well, you worry about, if there's another 10, 15 million that they miss out on from being 15th instead of 8th or something like that. So you can't completely write a season off. But what you can say is you are so wedded to this system that you believe that if you start to build the team for Amorim and invest in what he wants, then he may take you to a certain place. The problem is, the caveats to all of this is when you're on that journey, you need glimpses along the way of what it might be. And unfortunately, over the kind of 20 games or so he's been there, these have been so few and far between. And that's not me sort of criticizing him or saying he should be under pressure. But when you're asking people to believe in a distant project, when Jurgen Klopp came into Liverpool, it wasn't brilliant, results-wise, the first 6 months, but they had maybe 5 or 6 games in that period where you could say, I can see what Klopp's going to try to do here and why it should be supported. Because the other bit is, sorry, I'm dragging on here. This summer, Man United are going to spend money. And what's going to happen is they're going to buy players for a specific manager, for a specific system. Now, if next season goes really, really wrong until November, December, Amorim's not going to have credit, may not, depending what happens over the next few months, may not have credit in the bank. It will mean patience is very thin. And then all of a sudden, just like last summer, where you spent on Erik ten Hag's players, you spent a ton of money again on players suited to one manager's system. The next manager comes in, doesn't play with wing backs with 3-5-2 or whatever, and 3-4-3, and now they're back in that place and in an even worse financial situation. The cycle continues. So that's the kind of dynamic that I think the club will now be worrying about.
Yeah.
Adam uses the word embarrassing in that very well delivered monologue. Ollie, you've been in this industry a lot longer than I have. Can I ask?
And me.
Can I ask, do Manchester United look like a football club that's afraid of being embarrassed?
Well, I know what you mean. In some ways, the appointments they've made, the transfers they've made in the last, let's say 11 and a half years post-Ferguson, have been about making sure they never fall far. Mm-hmm. It's always been fairly short-term. Van Gaal was undoubtedly a short-term appointment. Mourinho was. Solskjaer in a different way because they felt this bounce. It's a lot of the transfers: Varane, Ronaldo, Casemiro, Falcao, Ibrahimovic, etc. There's always been this sense that we need to get back to an acceptable Manchester United level quickly, and they never have. They've hit second place on a couple of seasons, but they've never or rarely looked like the second best team in the country. Over that period, and frequently they've not looked one of the top 4, top 5 teams in the country. So I think there's been a sort of desperation to paper over the cracks or gloss over the cracks, do glossy things, do showy things that will have a short-term effect. I don't think there's ever really been a willingness at United to take maybe 2 steps back to take 4 or 5 steps forward, which I would say is what Arsenal did under Arteta. And did it really well. It's not. It's very hard to sort of strip everything back and streamline everything and then build, because there's always this desire to preserve what you've got. But it feels to me like the 2 steps back stage is what United are going through at the moment. The difficulty is, are they going to take those 4 or 5 steps forward? If they finish 15th, 14th, 13th, wherever this season. Is that a spring? Is that rock bottom and then they bounce up? Or is it a case that they are just completely stagnating? As Adam said earlier, you need, even if this is a season of rebuilding transition, write it off results-wise, you need real signs of progress. And what worries me, I know we talked about the formation earlier, but when he's so wedded to it feels like he's more wedded to the structure, the formation 3-4-3, than a particular way of playing. I've seen the midfield look completely different from one game to the other. I've seen the front three look completely different from one game to the other. So it feels like what we're seeing is not particularly a manager implementing a playing philosophy, a playing style. We're seeing a manager sticking to a structure. That to me seems dangerously dogmatic.
Let's bring in our Manchester United writer, Charlotte Harpur. Charlotte, you have an excellent exclusive interview on The Athletic with former Manchester United defender Raphael Varane. And he had a lot to say about his time at Old Trafford under Erik ten Hag, didn't he?
He didn't mince his words, but sitting down with Raphael, he's very softly spoken. So it kind of just rolled off the tongue that, yeah, I had a complicated relationship with Erik. It was idiosyncratic. It was tense. These are the words that he's using, ups and downs. And I think that was highlighted because he had come from Real Madrid, where there was a lot of stability, 4 Champions League titles, playing under Zidane and in his first years at the club, Ancelotti. So it was a big contrast then when you're coming in. Solskjaer's been Solskjaer, that's a tongue twister, isn't it? Solskjaer has been sacked. Then you've got Carrick as caretaker. Then you have Ranić as interim. Then you have Erik ten Hag. So 4 managers in his first year. But, we know that Erik ten Hag was very prescriptive, very rigid in his tactical game plans. That was a complete contrast with Real Madrid, where Varane played with instinct. He did say he had a heated discussion, musclé, he said in French, muscled, robust, around November time when he didn't play, even though he was fit. He said he told the manager some home truths. Erik put his version of events forward as well. And so, yeah, it was complicated. But he did credit him for allowing Varane to come back for the FA Cup final, and he loved that moment. And what Varane is clever with, he was very erudite, very articulate, that he's saying, look, I'm not pointing the finger here. I'm not going to slate the club. I want the club to do well. This is supposed to come across in a constructive way.
Yeah. Ollie, Varane also talks about, it's a really good piece actually, Charlotte, the lack of clear decision-making and structure at Manchester United. And is this being born out of what we're seeing on the pitch at this moment in time? Because I think about, I know we don't want to dwell on nostalgia, but I'm thinking about a Manchester United team that dominated for so long, but also the Premier League has changed so much. And when we compare them to the likes of Real Madrid, perhaps, or Bayern Munich, very different league structures and very different levels of investment. But if Manchester United don't update their structure, this is where we see what we're seeing on the pitch right now.
Yeah, it's interesting that there was a number of years where if you were writing something about Manchester United and you were criticising them and criticising their recruitment and criticising their lack of vision and poor structure and inadequate personnel, you would get people from the club expressing displeasure about those sentiments and saying, no, it's not, we're doing everything Liverpool do, we're doing everything Man City do, we've overhauled this, we've done that. And then eventually you get to the point where they say, no, things have got to change. We're now doing a cultural reset. We're overhauling our recruitment, our strategy, our medical facilities, our training facilities. Eventually, they always try to catch up, but I feel like they've never caught up at any point in the last 10, 11 years. I think they've been complacent as a club. They've not known what to do and which direction to go in, and I think they've finally they finally appoint a competent, proven, experienced sporting director, Dan Ashworth, in the summer at considerable expense, and sack him or let him go by mutual consent after a few months, again at great expense. I don't understand it. The big question about United has been what is the vision? What is the vision? Who is implementing that? Are you just sort of going from transfer window to transfer window, from manager to manager, from season to season? That sort of short term, trying to gloss over the cracks every summer, as they often did with big signings, Ronaldo, Varane, Casemiro, etc. And that's what it's felt like they've been doing. And now they've got to strip. They have stripped back things since Ineos has come in. They've made big appointments and overhauled this and that. I'm still absolutely unclear as to what the structure and what the strategy is. I know I've heard the vision being let's win our 21st league title. Great. But how? Yeah. When? I don't know. There are just alarm bells in every direction. And I think the expectation among some fans was that Ineos were going to come out, good old Sir Jim, good old Dave Brailsford, Dan Ashworth. They're all going to sort it all out. And as yet, pretty much a year in, they look further away from sorting it.
Yeah, Adam, Varane also speaks about too many people being involved in the decision making. Is it fair to say Manchester United are an old-fashioned club trying to sort of operate in what feels like a digital age? There's so much of what happened in the past. I know you don't want to talk about nostalgia, but there's too much of holding on to that. And everyone else just seems to have moved on because they're trying to get to the top their very selves.
So, to be fair, I don't think Ineos can be accused of that. When you look at some of the decisions they made around, cutting Alex Ferguson's ambassadorialship, I mean, that's not something the Glazers would ever have dared to do. Or I know the Glazers, clearly are on board with the stuff that is happening and aren't stepping in, but it's not something they would have done if they were in sole ownership. And ex-players' roles being cut and stuff like that. So. And even things like considering, letting Mainu or Garnacho go, which they may have to do this summer, if the right bids come in. Again, I think they are moving away from a kind of nostalgia and almost to a fault, actually. When you look at, you're almost looking at Manchester United and saying, what does Manchester United stand for anymore? Does it just stand for trimming costs and that kind of thing? On the flip side of that is they've lost over 300 million over the last 5 years, and they have to do a little bit of that. So it's not an easy inheritance by any means whatsoever. Now, the problem with that is if they'd done their due diligence, they should have known this wasn't an easy inheritance. That this, that running I would say the football club outside of Barcelona and Real Madrid that by far and away gets the most global attention in the world. From an English football point of view, it's only really England during tournaments that gets, the level of scrutiny and things like that. Stories are stories at Man United that just wouldn't be at other clubs. And that's not because of agendas or anything like that. It's just because the thirst and interest is so high. The challenge is now for Ineos that, they came in. And I went to, Ratcliffe did a kind of a round table with journalists, I think maybe February last year, shortly after coming in. And he was saying then that, the game model that Manchester United would have would be imposed by kind of sporting director, the experts that they hire. And now, we're a year down the line and the game model seems to be entirely back at the behest of a head coach, which again puts you back on that cycle of acquiring players for a specific system rather than a club vision. Now, that may work out if Amorim turns out to be a fantastic appointment and everything goes well and they win the title in 2028. But it's not what they said it was going to be back then. You then have them hiring, obviously, as we've discussed, sporting director. It's a bit like when people leave Brighton, right? They step out of Brighton and you're saying, were they good or was the place they were at actually just an amazing place to work? So they now have Mark Critchley, our colleague, did a really good piece last week about Man United's situation with data, which is interesting because Jim Ratcliffe himself, in an interview with the United We Stand fanzine, I think he called it, what century did he call it?
Last century.
Last century. Sorry, I said 15th century. Last.
He said
Still
Manchester
kicking
United-
pigskins around.
That's my tabloid instinct kicking in. 15th century. No, but what's really interesting there now is there's been such a big turnover of executive staff at United over the past 12 to 18 months. The CEO's left. The interim CEO, Patrick Stewart, then left. The first one, Richard Arnold. The commercial lead that's, Man United's accounts today were praising their deal with Qualcomm and Snapdragon. Well, they've turfed out the people that did that deal, or they've chosen to leave because they don't want to continue to work there. And there's been a huge amount of change that I think Dom Jordan, who was previously working on data, has now left the club as well. Ineos have brought in a guy called Gary Hemingway, who previously worked for one of Ineos's subsidiaries, and his role, staff have been told, is a kind of Venn diagram of, let me get this right, infrastructure projects and football data. Now, you've got to have some skill set to be able to come across all of that in a really, really authoritative way. So again, it may be he's the right person. Let's see. And data, we always talk about data just around transfers and things like that. There's so much though within a football club, whether it's academy development, young player development, first team development, the way a player runs, right? I was in at Feyenoord last year and saw they were doing that with their striker, like studying the way a player runs and building data banks on that.
Injury
and also,
recovery.
I was just about to say injury prevention, which I know is something that wasn't on the initial priorities, when Jordan first came in at United, because they were doing catch up on recruitment. But so when we say, have they caught up with Liverpool or Arsenal or Man City, the problem also is these clubs don't stop.
It's no longer catching up with Liverpool, Manchester City. It's also now the Premier League middle class is stronger than ever.
Yeah,
we are talking in an age
Brighton,
of not even Brighton, Bournemouth. Bournemouth are there. Nottingham Forest went through that ridiculous era of churn where the training matches look like Squid Games, but they have now settled on what they want to do.
But don't you think their wealth, Man United's wealth, over the last 15 years has bred a complacency?
Be you a sports team, be you a university, be you a government, if you believe in institutional exceptionalism, if you believe it's fine because we are us, you will be rotted from the inside out. And we have seen this with Manchester United. And a very, very good example of data and the inconsistencies and whatnot is when Louis van Gaal came into Manchester United, he was very much fixated on data and making sure Manchester United players were fitter and stronger and whatnot. And at great request, Manchester United installed 3G pictures. And then when Jose Mourinho came in, Mourinho, for a while, has considered player fitness not actually an area of expertise. And Mourinho has, for a long time, believed that he is able to tell just naturally intuit whether a player is fit or not. So a lot of that equipment was removed because Manchester United, for a very, very long time, and still, I think, to this day, in some way, want to support the manager and want to be seen to be supporting the manager rather than creating a system where the manager is a very powerful cog in a much bigger machine. So that secession of Van Gaal into Mourinho meant when Ole Gunnar Solskjaer came in and wanted to make Manchester United a more aggressive team and press higher up the field, he couldn't because he didn't necessarily have the tracking data and the fitness data, and the players weren't necessarily fit enough to do it, which reset things further backwards. We're talking about players like Cristiano Ronaldo and Raphael Varane coming to Manchester United. And let's be very, very clear. The summer where Raphael Varane arrived at Manchester United, look at where the other football teams in the Premier League were buying their centre-backs from. United went out and bought a player towards the end of his career. Yes, an incredibly decorated, incredibly talented centre-back. Whereas a lot of other teams were going, we need to get younger centre-backs. Because the Premier League is getting more and more aggressive, and we need more and more players who are able to run and run and run and run and run. And now what you've got is a Manchester United squad who routinely loses games because they do not have the requisite physicality to compete with Crystal Palace, let alone a team like, say, Liverpool. This is your mess.
Charlotte, well, Carl makes a really good point about youth. Varane pointed out that at Madrid, players had time to develop in a protected environment before taking on major responsibilities, while at United, young players are often expected to perform immediately. I mean, I look at who was on the bench, Chido Obi Martin, the kid they just got from Arsenal. He's only played a handful of youth matches and he's already been called up. I mean, that is out of circumstance to play for the first team. Do you think this is something that has changed from the time of Alex Ferguson, how young players are integrated into the squad?
The whole framework of having a long-term strategy. You have your jigsaw puzzle and you have your borderline, and you add a piece or you take one out and you do it incrementally. It's not lastminute.com. And so these young players is what Varane was saying. Look at Patrick Dorgu. He's 20, but he's thrust straight into that because of United's lack of long-term planning and squad depth, and just as we were talking about, younger players to progress upwards, not recruiting older players who are only going to, stay 2 years, move on because of the physical demands, as we've just been talking about. Varane was also saying that, that's part of the environment, creating a calm, stable environment for young players so that they come in and all they have to do is watch and learn. They don't have that responsibility on their shoulders. They're not expected to go out in front of 70,000 at Old Trafford when, times are really, really tough. Like coming into that environment and playing well when the team is struggling and you're only 19, 20. That's what he was talking about when he was saying about how the club can help with that pressure.
Isn't that damning that a former Real Madrid player is talking about... how can Real Madrid be a picture of consistency? Really? Come on now. And looking after young players. This is a football club that routinely, when the players come through Casilla, are very often told you have to go somewhere else in La Liga and we'll get the buyback clause and you can return. Look at players like Carvalho. We're looking at. I mean, I think about Sergio Canales. He was put on the front cover of multiple magazines being told he's the child. I mean, look at Martin Odegaard. Right? Real Madrid are not the picture of consistency and youthful development that Bayern Munich are, that Barcelona are. And yet, for Raphael Varane to sit there and go, the amount of pressure that you have at Real Madrid is very different compared to Manchester United is incredibly damning on Manchester United. It's not just that when you look at the Manchester United bench and you're now seeing young players that meant to see. It's also when you look at the first team. I look at a football player like Alejandro Garnacho. He's in his third season proper as a professional football player. And he has played, quite frankly, too much football because the players who are meant to be in those positions right now who should be alternating with, one of them is Jadon Sancho, who now is being paid money by Manchester United to play for Chelsea. And the other one is Anthony, who is now on loan at Real Betis. So the pressure on these players, it isn't just, can you cope in this furnace, cauldron, whatever, a football team, but it's, can you bail us out of numerous transfer mistakes elsewhere? You look at Mainu, and we can talk about Mainu's physicality and whatnot and whether or not he might be sold. Mainu is playing, and he's in this team right now because Manchester United spent 55 million plus 5 on Mason Mount. And Mason Mount, who I think is a phenomenal football player when he is fit, has not been fit and has not been able to fit into a role that, quite frankly, I don't think he should have been purchased for. Manchester United needed a number 8 box-to-box midfielder to play next to Casemiro, and they got Mason Mount, who's much more of a final third player. Why did that deal occur? And it's only because Mainu emerged that this sort of mild misfire or dud has been covered up. It's this ridiculous amount of pressure to put on to a bunch of teenagers or people just turning 20.
I find it interesting because I can see that there is an awful lot of pressure on Manchester United players. The media attention we've spoken about, the social media pressure. I think a lot of the players would argue it's more social media than sort of old-fashioned mainstream media. The pressure that they feel, but there doesn't seem pressure to achieve excellence. There seems to be a pressure which is a burden, which is a sort of day in, day out, week in, week out sort of depression that hangs over the club, and that there's that type of pressure. But I don't think. I mean, the pressure that exists at Real Madrid, the pressure that exists at Bayern Munich, the pressure that exists, frankly, I mean, the pressure to perform week in, week out, which, for example, Guardiola would put on his players at Manchester City, which Klopp would put now on a slot at Liverpool, Mikel Arteta at Arsenal, which Ferguson, most famously of all, would put on the players at Manchester United. That pressure, the pressure to sustain excellence and achieve excellence, doesn't seem to exist. You get players getting given huge contracts for not very much, Carl. You get. I mean, how many contracts do these players sign on the basis of their first sort of dozen games, and then another huge contract?
I would say there is pressure. I would say there's pressure to excellence. I would say if you sit at Old Trafford when the score is 0-0 and Manchester United are trying to progress the ball slowly in their third, you can feel it. There is a tangible anxiety.
But that pressure,
the attack thing is there.
But
and I think that crowd is
exceptionally patient. That crowd has been exceptionally patient over the last 12 years. Almost to a fault. I would say not to a fault, because I think the support has been incredible.
Of course, I'm not saying the Manchester United crowd are making these players more anxious, but there is an anxiety that exists around Manchester United.
But that's more about creating an environment that allows people to flourish. Though,
and we've gone back and forth about this all the time.
Yeah.
When you're hearing the former class of '92 talk about how the Manchester United shirt weighs heavy, the follow-up question should be, who is making that shirt feel lighter?
Yeah.
And this constant search to find one special unicorn football manager out there, the response to that is, shouldn't you just try and find like a thoroughbred and then build a proper stable around them so they don't have to be... You cannot keep comparing football managers to Sir Alex Ferguson, because on some level, everyone in and around Manchester United acknowledges Sir Alex Ferguson is the greatest football manager of all time and has no comparison. So why do you keep comparing people to him? If he's the greatest at Zenith, surely you need to just create an environment where you don't necessarily need someone who's Ferguson level, because they only happen one every however many decades. Surely you can just create an environment so if you're just quite competent and quite good, you can thrive. And I think this has been a thing that's been going on at Manchester United for years, where the quite competent person cannot thrive, because the moment you're quite competent at something, you're given extra work. Yeah. Let's look at David De Gea. Fantastic, athletic shot stopper. Not great at claiming crosses, not great with his feet. And there were just various seasons at Manchester United where various managers went, the defense, whatever, De Gea will protect you. And Mourinho says his greatest achievement is getting Manchester United second. That's not him. That's De Gea doing one of the greatest goalkeeping seasons of all time. And then, of course, De Gea got a very big contract. And then a couple of years down the line, you're going, oh, wait, why have we given De Gea this contract? There's no pressure to excellence. Like, there is pressure to excellence. He's doing 1.5 people's jobs. Look at Bruno Fernandes. You can say, yes, this contract, what is the rule for his contract? It's because he's been running forever.
Okay. I think we get the point, Carl. I got it. But under those circumstances then, Adam, let's wrap this up. I mean, if you're a young player right now, do you want to come to United? Do you think you might get a game for sure, but are you going to be a better player?
Well, it depends where you are as that young player, who else is in for you, who else is in those positions. Those are all those things you weigh up. I think it's probably too simple to say, I'm a young player and I don't want to go to Man United. I think it's actually quite interesting that Ineos seem to be... I'd actually love to see some data on how the average age of players signed by Big Six clubs in the Premier League has changed over the last 5 years or so, because it feels like signings are getting younger and younger and younger, and expected to come into first team environments younger and younger and younger. And that's kind of fine if you're, I don't know, Lenny Yoro and you sign for Liverpool and you're playing next to Virgil van Dijk to hold your hand. It's a bit different if you're coming into a team that loses, once, twice a week, and you're expected to be a saviour. And, you have, I think part of the problem with Man United is anything that's like mildly good gets blown into, oh my God, they're back, or oh my God, this is a turning point, or, they score a goal in the last minute and straight away. And by the way, it's not just social media, mainstream media do this as well. It's Man United score in the last minute. They've scored in Fergie time. It's like the olden days, right? It's the easiest headline in the world because it's, we've written match reports under time pressure, and you just need to put something on the top, and it's Man United have scored a last-minute goal at Old Trafford. It's just like it used to be. It's not. It's like it's a bit of a crap win against a team low down in the table, Southampton or something a few weeks ago, and then if they're a bit mediocre, it's a disaster. Like, I thought the reaction to the defeat at Tottenham at the weekend was absurd. Because they lost 1-0 against, okay, Tottenham having a bad season, but they actually had a few players back on the day. Man United had a lot of players out, had no one on the bench. On the balance of the game, I thought United had a few chances, Tottenham had a few chances. Of all the performances this season, for the reaction to be as big as it was, yes, it speaks to the trend and how things aren't improving and this bigger story, this bigger narrative. But anything that's mildly good is built as a huge achievement. Anything that's mediocre is built as a disaster. And I think that's where it affects the players, the manager, because it's very hard, I think, to cocoon yourself from that at any given time. And it's very easy for us to sit here and say they should be able to do that. But I do think that is a real issue at United. I don't know, like Xerxes on Sunday, like does a few nice turns, and you just see him getting like this most like people doing reels of him on social media as
Just
though
looking
it's
for
like,
hope, man. They're just looking for
no,
hope.
I know, but it's as if they're watching Cantona in the 90s.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, and that's not about Xerxes. It just sort of shows the extremes that anything related to Man United unfortunately seems to attract. But I do think it's important that we do just put some. This has been basically a doom podcast.
Give
right?
us some positivity. Let's wrap on some positivity.
Like I think as controversial as some of the decisions they've made are, and some of the criticism they've got is entirely fair. I've given them some of it. What I would say is their cash position, Manchester United's cash position, would be even more disastrous if not for the money that Ineos have actually put in since they've come into the club, which is, by the way, more than the Glazers have ever done. There is infrastructure work going on at Carrington, investment into the training ground. There is this talk about stadium. So it's not all it's not all terrible. They do have a manager that, when you listen to him talk in a press conference, seems to talk pretty well. But hopefully the team will get there. I don't know. That's my 10-second dose of hope to caveat everything else.
How we left that right to the end. It's a bit where no one probably will listen to. Anyway, let's leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us, and also Charlotte as well. Make sure you head over to The Athletic right now to take a look at Charlotte's piece with Varane. A really, really good interview. We'll be back tomorrow. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anka, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.